Hi everyone, this is Eric Bond, the founder of Beat the GMAT, and thanks so much for joining us this evening for another great MBA mission session. This one's called Acing the Interview, Business School Interview Workshop. How very timely, huh? Because I'm sure a lot of you are freaking out about your round 2 interviews, which are coming up soon. Before we begin this session, I just want to make a couple notes. The first is that this is a session with mbaMission. We've been doing a couple sessions with the good folks at mbaMission in the past season, and as many of you know, the quality has always been great because this is one of the top mbaMissions firms in the industry. And so for those of you who are looking to get some advice, be it free advice from their blog or want to talk to some of their great consultants, I highly recommend you visit mbaMission.com after this session. And also, I want to introduce you to today's speaker. We're very, very lucky to be joined by Rachel Beck, who is a senior consultant with mbaMission. Just a couple things about Rachel's background. So she is a graduate of both Lehigh University. She holds a master of Lehigh University as well as Columbia, where she got an MBA from Columbia Business School, and also has a master's degree in journalism. And this is really the 1-2 punch that makes, I think, Rachel a very solid expert in MBA admissions, because not only has she gone through the admissions process and gotten into a great business school like Columbia, but she also has a very deep background in journalism, where she was a nationally syndicated business columnist. She was a feature writer for the Associated Press. So Rachel is someone who really understands how to craft compelling messages from her journalism background, and also understands our needs as business school students, or business school applicants, I should say. So Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here tonight, and this is a hot topic right now in the business school applicant world, and I think there's a lot to talk about. So.
I certainly agree with you. And oh yeah, one more thing before I forget is this is obviously a live session. If you guys have questions during this event, make sure to submit them. On the right-hand side of your screen, you should see a little window where you can write in your questions. Me and B, my colleague, are standing by looking at the questions, and at the end of Rachel's presentation, we're going to ask her some questions live from the audience. So if you have questions, submit them. We'll do our best to get through as many questions as we can in the hour. So Rachel, I'm going to send it back to you. The floor is yours.
Good. Thank you so much. So we have a lot to cover tonight, and this is our table of contents. We're really going to go through every last thing you would need to know about the interview process, and I really hope that you leave in an hour and feel like this was a really value-added hour for you, and you really have a good sense of what the interview process is like and how you can really ace interviews. It can be done, I swear. If you go in prepared, the road is not going to be difficult. So let's get started. So let's first begin with the types of interviews. And I'm going to look at the left-hand side of the screen first, and then we'll get to what's on the right-hand side of the screen. There are 3 different types of interviews. The first is the applicant-initiated. Those you sign up for. You don't need to be asked for an applicant-initiated interview. They say, if you're interested, give us a call and make an appointment. It's as simple as that. Then there are school-initiated post-application interviews. Many of you are probably facing them right now or hoping to face them right now. That's when the school notifies you that you've been selected after you've submitted your application. And then there's the third, which is a hybrid. Some schools do applicant initiated before a deadline and then school initiated after a deadline. I know it sounds confusing, but there are schools out there that do that. So let's dive into each of these a little bit more. Okay, so back to should you go to what matters more? They both matter. That's my point. If this is a school you're interested in and it has an applicant-initiated interview, go for it. You should be there because this is a chance to get in front of them in a way that you might not have the opportunity otherwise. Now, is the preparation different? That's another question I get a lot. There shouldn't be any difference in the preparation, except for the fact that with self-scheduled interviews, you might not have completed your essays yet. So maybe your thoughts are not as clearly fleshed out, but be careful because you still need to go into a applicant-initiated interview knowing your stuff. You still have to be able to answer why MBA and why this school. The last thing you want to do is show up for one of these interviews and seem like it's very informal. This is not an informational interview. These are real interviews, the applicant-initiated interviews. In terms of when you should schedule an interview, and I know that this is a little bit past this season, but there might be people on the call who are interested for next year, so I just wanted to point this out. If you're going for a self-initiated interview, do it as soon as you can, because at some schools the invites are limited, and not the invites, but the slots are limited. And so you want to get in there as quickly as you can and make sure that you secure your spots. And one other thing I wanted to say in terms of the school-initiated interviews. A lot of people get turned off when it's an alumni interview and they are sent a list of like 8 or 10 alumni and they think, well, why is this? That's because sometimes alumni are very hard to get in touch with. I was an alumni interviewer for much of the last 10 years for Columbia Business School, and you know, there were times when people called me and I really couldn't meet with them because I had work obligations. So the reason they give you 8 to 10 names is because they want you to be able to get somebody. Just so you know that and keep that in mind. Okay, let's move to this. So let's talk about the types of interviews. This was the right side of the screen. There are blind interviews versus comprehensive interviews. The blind interviews is when the person you're interviewing with usually just has looked at your resume, if that. Some will really read it over, some will not really read it over. It's really blind, meaning they don't have much information on you. On the other hand, a comprehensive interview, they'll really know it all. They will have read your essays, they will have looked over your resume. They're probably not going to ask you the question, tell me about yourself. They already know the answer to that. They're going to be a little more probing in each of their questions. So keep that in mind. A question I get a lot is, do they know my GPA and GMAT score? Well, for a blind interview, most likely not. For a comprehensive interview, they might know it. I will say that that's a question that typically is not asked during the interview, so I wouldn't sweat it. It typically is not something that comes up. Also, as I said before, they're going to have, in a comprehensive interview, they're going to have all your essays and your recommendations. They're really going to be probing you. In terms of, I also am often asked this question, well, something changed at work, can I update my resume? Of course you can update your resume. If material has changed in your resume, you should update it. You know, that might mean you changed jobs, or you got an amazing award, or you were given a promotion, or you worked on an exciting project that really has something, you know, you want to get on that resume. For sure, update it. I would do that before the interview, number one. I would call the admissions office and talk to somebody and just say, you know, I would like to update my resume. Who is the right person to email that to? I think that's important so you know it's getting in the right hands. I also suggest to every one of my clients, bring 2 copies of your resume to your interviews, regardless if they're blind or comprehensive. One for you and one for the interviewer. You just want to come prepared. If you're on a blind interview and they don't have any material, you give it to them, and that just might, you know your resume inside and out. It could be a nice talking point. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about time-limited versus open-ended interviews. With a time-limited interview, the interviewer is going to be pretty specific that you have 30 minutes or 45 minutes to conduct the interview. You have to be respectful of the time. You don't say, oh, can I have a few more minutes? It's 30 minutes, you're in and you're out. A lot of, especially on-campus interviews, they're very regimented. You know, you leave the room, the next person walks in 10, 20 times a day. Remember that the interviewer is responsible for the time, you're not. At Wharton, it's known that they have a big clock in the room. So it's up to them to really say the interview is over. But you just have to remember you need to keep time management in your head. You don't want to go on and on and on in a story that eats up 10 minutes of your 30 minutes, and then you don't get to all the other things that you really want them to know about you. An open-ended interview is just less structured. A lot of times that's an off-campus alumni interview. That doesn't mean you get an hour and a half in the alumni's office. It's not like that. You probably only have 30 or 45 minutes, but it might not be as okay, you're out. It's a little bit more relaxed. So keep that in mind. You don't want to go on and on in an open-ended interview either. So the big question on campus or off campus, and whether to do staff or student or alumni, what's better? I think there's this perception that on campus is better. On campus, and I don't believe that to be true. They're actually equally weighted. There are differences between them that you should keep in mind. On campus is much more structured. It's more formal. It's typically done by members of the admissions committee or second-year students. It's, as I said before, it's more time defined. The interviewer could be less personable because they're doing this all day long. I hear from a lot of clients when they interview on campus that the interviewer is taking more notes than looking at them, you know, face to face. And you have to just know that going in, and that's just the way that they operate, but don't be unnerved by it. Off-campus interviews are just more casual. They're typically with the alumni. They're either at their office or in a nearby coffee shop. But as I said before, the alumni does not have all the time in the world. So if you had a choice, what would you choose? And this is a fair question. Some schools do give you that choice. So I think the first thing that you should weigh is, have you visited this school before? If this school is a school that you think you would like to go to, have you visited it before? Even though the off-campus interview has the same weight, if this is a school you're interested in, this could really be an opportunity for you to go on campus, do the interview, visit the school, sit in on a class, get a tour, go to an info session, have lunch with a student. You could really kill two birds with one stone. And imagine the wealth of things that you could talk about during the interview if you took a little time to be on campus. But as I said, it's all equal. So there's not a difference. In fact, they get the same set of questions, whether you're on campus or off campus. So just keep that in mind. Okay, the types of questions. So the reason that schools interview you is because they want to get a sense of who you are and whether you fit in with their school and their culture. They want you to be happy once you're there, and they also want to see if you're the type of student or person that will work well with their student body. You know, they want to know, is this the person that would, you know, people want to be in a learning group with, or they want to sit next to in class. So part of the interview is to kind of understand, you know, does this person work with our school? What's the person's personality? You know, is the maturity factor. How do you handle yourself in a professional setting? That's part of what the interview is all about. When I was an interviewer for Columbia, it would amaze me that people would come in and they would literally be like sweating bullets before we even started talking, and I consider myself pretty unintimidating and pretty friendly, and they couldn't even get into the interview because they were so nervous. And if somebody's not able to really connect during the interview, it makes it hard to believe that they'll really be able to connect during business school where the pressure is like ramped up tenfold, right? So part of it is to kind of see this person, you know, face to face and how they're behaving, and also being able to see whether the words on the paper matches the person in front of you. Now granted, when it's a blind interview, you haven't seen the words on the paper, but your assessment that you write up needs to somewhat match who this person is in terms of their application and their recommendation. That's very, very important. And then there's the enthusiasm factor. Nothing is worse than interviewing somebody who's like doesn't want to be there or hasn't done their homework. You really need to be engaging during that interview. You really need to give the thorough answers and give those answers with directness and confidence. You want to show them, you want to make eye contact. You want to show them that this is your top spot. Even if this is not your first choice school, everybody knows that, you know, it's out of your hands what school you ultimately get into. So you have to give these interviews your best shot and show that enthusiasm. The tip I use with my clients is I really strongly suggest practicing ahead of time. There's a difference between practicing and like having a rehearsed answer. If you have a rehearsed answer, it kind of feels a little bit forced, but if you practice and you know your points, that really, really will make a difference. And this is the tip that I learned as a journalist based on interviewing a lot of high-level people, that you really wanted to be able to articulate your questions and look kind of serious. And I also learned it in business school again when we did interview workshops. Look in your bathroom mirror when you're interviewing, when you're practicing, because you're staring yourself in the face, and you'll be able to tell if you're not giving a good answer, number one. Number two, you'll be able to kind of look at your facial expressions when you're giving your answer. And I think that's important, because you're going to be able to say, well, you know what, I don't like the way I'm looking, I don't like the way I'm answering. You know, a lot of people say practice with a boyfriend or girlfriend or a parent or a friend, whatever it might be. That's fine too, but I always say staring yourself in the mirror really, really pays off. And through my career, it has paid off, because it has taught me at points where I have like a weakness in an answer, and I think that that's important. Okay, so these are the type of questions that we're going to go through, and we're going to just jump to the next slide. Okay, so let's start with open-ended questions. Everyone, please be prepared for the walk me through your resume or tell me about yourself question if you're going on a blind interview. These are the most important questions to practice. They're a lot harder than you think they'll be, because you only have about 3 or 4 minutes to answer these questions, and you want to get your point across to the interviewer, and you don't want this to be a drag-out 10-minute answer. Here are some hints that I give to my clients, and I think they really help. Think in sound bites. Look for easy ways to remember the themes or the data points. A lot of times I also say give a macro view and then bring it down to a micro view, because that will really help. For instance, you could start off by saying, you know, throughout my academic and professional endeavors, you can see I've been focused on innovation. Or you could say, like, a common theme throughout my resume is my passion and interest for education. You know, you could follow that up by saying, you know, I started working with kids when I was in high school, and I volunteered at a local daycare center, and in college I majored in teaching, and I you know, after college became a teacher and then eventually went into administration. You can see the story building. Another tip I give is avoid the laundry list of I did this and I did that and I did this and I did that. I'm very strict with my clients that they can't have 2 sentences in a row that start with I, because I just feel like it doesn't read as well. And I'd like to kind of impress on you the same idea for the interview. You don't want it just to be this, you know, I did. Think of 3 to 5 bullet points that you want to hit on that really showcase who you are and your accomplishments. That will really stick with the interviewer a lot more than a list of all the things you've done in your life. If you hook yourself into those 3 to 5 points, it will make a big difference in your answer. And you'll be able to answer it in the 4 minutes that you really should answer it in. Lastly, I just wanted to point this out. If you work for a company or you hold a job that's not well known to the average person, you might want to take 15 seconds just to give a little bit of an explanation. I have a client right now who works in a field that honestly I had never even heard of, and he kept talking to me about it, and I found it confusing and I didn't understand. So I literally said to him, explain it to me like I'm in 2nd grade, because the admissions committee members are not going to understand this either. So we need to bring it down to the most basic terms so that the average person can understand that. And I think everybody has to kind of operate under those terms also, that you can't use industry jargon when describing what you're doing. You really want to explain things clearly and concisely, and stay away from the jargon that you might be used to because you're involved in your daily career, but the admissions committee member is not part of your industry. They don't know every last thing about your career, so steer clear from that. The next kind of questions are behavioral questions. Some schools like Wharton are big into these behavioral questions. A few years ago, Wharton introduced these. These are more like, tell me about a time you had an influence on others, or tell me about a time you were on a team with someone who didn't cooperate. The key to these questions is to be concise, yet detailed, and bring in real-world examples. We like to coach our clients and tell them to use a STAR structure for answering these questions. What I mean by a STAR structure is you go through these different steps, and it will help you very, very concisely and clearly lay out your point. So for instance, situation is where you give an example of a situation you were involved in that resulted in a positive outcome. Okay. The task is you're describing the tasks involved in that situation. The action is you're talking about the various actions involved in the situation's tasks. And the results are what the results were because of your actions. As you're preparing for your interviews, we strongly recommend that you identify 2 or 3 of your top selling points and determine how you're going to lay them out using this STAR method. So when you do the prep ahead of the interview, you have things in your head. It's easier to recall them if you've actually prepared for them. With these behavioral questions, what's important to know is the interviewer is basically trying to pick apart your stories. So sometimes they'll start with an open-ended question and then they'll lead to a behavioral question. So just be prepared for that. I just wanted to kind of give an example of how to do a STAR structure, just because I think it might be a little bit helpful. So if I was asked the question, tell me about a time when you had to go above and beyond the call of duty in order to get a job done, you could do something like this. So the situation would be, during an internship last summer, I was responsible for managing different events. The task was, I noticed that attendance had dropped 30% at these events, and I wanted to get it up. The action would have been, I designed new promotional material to go, and I went out to local businesses and I got feedback on what was wrong with our events, and the result was I was able to boost attendance by 18%. Just some suggestions, but I really, really suggest preparing, going through your experiences and thinking about them in that STAR structure, because it will really help you. Part of the behavioral roster of questions is that dreaded, address a weakness kind of question. And I think everybody really, really struggles with this, because there's this tendency to want to go with a positive negative, meaning a weakness that really isn't so weak. But unfortunately, that really won't cut it. You want to find something where it really is a weakness and how you overcame it or are working to improve it. Some suggestions on how you come up with your weaknesses is look at your previous performance evaluations. A lot of times your managers will have to put something in there that addresses some of your weaknesses, or maybe how you improved on a weakness. So that might help trigger something in your memory. The purpose of this question, that's something I also get asked a lot too. Business schools want people who are self-aware. And this is a hard question, but it also forces you to kind of think, you know, I'm not perfect. What could I improve on? And they like that. They like to see that. I wanted to give you an example of what I think is a good weakness, not a good example of a weakness, not a good weakness. I have a client who's extremely shy, and the people that he managed thought that he seemed distant or aloof. I mean, he was really struggling because he's so shy. People felt like they couldn't approach him. His supervisors told him that he had to be more sociable. He had to be out of his shell a little more, which was really hard for him. And he really started to work on it over time, little by little. He would hold staff meetings so that people could see that he was friendly and at times even funny and engaged, things that they couldn't really see otherwise. He also got very involved in training at his company, which kind of forced him to break out of his shell. And in the time that he's been working on this, he's now one of the lead trainers. So that's an example of really addressing a weakness that he's been able to overcome. It's a real weakness for him. Another area that really causes a lot of stress is the ethical dilemma question. For some reason, it always baffles applicants, and there's a reason why, because it's hard to understand. Everyone understands what's ethical and what isn't ethical or unethical. The problem usually lies in the word dilemma. A dilemma typically occurs when two equally conclusive sides exist simultaneously. So it's hard for people to really understand. I wanted to give two examples so that you could kind of see exactly what I was talking about, because I think this will help you crystallize in your mind what an ethical dilemma is, and then you could seek out ethical dilemmas in your own life so you have that on your bench in case you're asked this question. So the first example is this. While I was working at firm ABC, my boss asked me to book our second quarter revenue in advance so that we could create the appearance of a great first quarter. I firmly told him that was unethical and refused. So this is not an ethical dilemma, because you were asked to do something clearly unethical and there's only one reasonable side. So the reader wouldn't want to know, or the interviewer wouldn't want to know, well, did you choose the other side? Because the other side is the wrong side anyway. Now here's another example which I think lays it out a little bit more. So as the marketing manager of a small pharmaceutical company, I had to set the price for a breakthrough drug. I needed to consider that on one hand, a rock bottom price would mean that our life-saving drug would be available to all, but on the other hand, even though a high price would serve a smaller market, it would make the drug far more profitable and would ensure that we could continue to conduct valuable research in addition to life-saving compounds. Okay? In the second example, there's a true dilemma. The applicant could be comfortable telling the reader that he pursued either one of these pricing strategies. So the ethical dilemma is you could go to the left or you could go to the right. It's not black or white. It's not, no, I wouldn't go this way. Just keep that in mind as you're preparing. The whys. You will get these questions. Why is now the right time for you to get your MBA? Why do you want to be part of your class? Why Wharton? Why Kellogg? Why an MBA? These questions come up in every interview. Be prepared for them. Sometimes I like to say, think about the answer in an inverted pyramid. Start broad and then get narrow. So begin with, maybe you're beginning with the curriculum, and then you're going down to the concentration, and then maybe the professors. But you want to be specific. You want to tell them, I want to go to this school, and you don't want to just say I want to go to this school because of its emphasis on hands-on learning. I want to go to this school because of program X, Y, and Z, which I talked to this current student who was in the program, who then got was able to learn this skill, and this skill from the program, and is leveraging that into her job, which she secured for next year. It's really important to really show them that you've done your homework on these questions. I also strongly suggest to tell them, yes, you visited a class and what impressed you about it, or if you connected with a student or students, let them know, I talked to this student and he told me about this experience, and then connect it back to you. It's the same idea as the tell me about yourself question. Get those 3 to 5, sound bites, and that will really help you organize your thoughts. One last thing, geography can also be used in these questions, especially if you're somebody who would like to make the city where the school is based your, future home. That's a strong argument too. So just keep that in mind. What do you like to do for fun? The personal questions. For some reason, the lightest question can cause the biggest amount of stress. People get crazy over these kind of questions. But what I tell my clients all the time is have some fun with that. When I work on a resume, I often use the last line of the resume to really tell what are some fun facts about my clients. What are you interested in? What do you do that's different than other people? What makes you you? That's the last line on the resume. So this question is kind of like, one of the final questions in an interview where you get to kind of show who you are, and a little bit of your personality. There is no right or wrong answer. Be yourself. If possible, it's great to tie it back to the school. It doesn't have to be, but sometimes it's great. For instance, let's say you were an amateur chef. You could say, like, being from Texas, one of my best dishes is chili, and I can't wait to make my award-winning chili for the HBS chili cook-off or something like that. Or I'm an avid skier, and I can't wait to organize next year's trip to Whistler, whatever it might be. Those tie it back to the school. But there's no wrong answer with the personal questions. Okay, so the questions that you get to ask. A lot of that should depend on who's interviewing you. Alumni get asked different questions than a member of the admissions committee, and they get asked different questions than students. So here's my view of what acceptable questions seem or look like. First of all, a tip I often give is look at the website and look at some of the recent news releases. This might tip you off to current happenings at the school and that you can use to then showcase your knowledge. Because the point of the questions that you get to ask is you kind of have to show that you've done your homework. For instance, if there's a new dean, it's totally acceptable to ask the question like, the new dean has been in place for 6 months. What would you say the biggest change in the school is over that time? That's totally acceptable. If you're meeting with a student or an alumni, it's fine to ask, what did you enjoy most about your business school experience? That's absolutely fine. You can also ask about something that you observed at the school and look for confirmation. That's what we call this observation confirmation. For instance, like when I visited Kellogg, I was surprised to see so many faculty and students were eating lunch together. In fact, the 3 meals I ate on campus included a faculty member joining us. Is that typical? Is it encouraged by the administration? I mean, that's kind of just you observe something and you want to get some confirmation on it. How about the questions that you should avoid? And there are plenty of them. You don't want to ask a question that makes you look like you haven't done your homework. Like, you don't want to ask a question at Columbia, like, what are the resources for entrepreneurs? That doesn't sound like you've done any work. Don't ask negative questions. I noticed that your school dropped in the rankings last year. Do you know why? That would be very bad. Don't be too general. Like, why should I come to your school? In the same breath, don't be so overly detailed that the person interviewing you couldn't even answer that. To an alumni or a student, don't ask the question, why did you choose to go to this school? Because you don't know anything about their personal circumstances, so you don't want to go there. Just avoid it. And also avoid those factual questions that you could have found out on your own, as I said before. Like, you don't want to ask a question that's just so easily available online. Technical questions are very, very unlikely. Those are very, very detailed questions about something maybe on your resume, something that you do in your career. They almost never come up, so don't worry about them. But what I want is I don't want you to let a question rattle you if you happen to get one. I had a client this fall who was interviewing with HBS, and they did ask him kind of an out-of-the-box question about what corporate business model he respected the most and why. And about a minute into his answer, the interviewer said, well, it can't be Google or Apple, and he was answering Google, so he kind of had to start from scratch. And that was a very, very unusual question, and we haven't heard anybody else getting that question. And thankfully, he practiced a lot in his interviews about, don't get rattled. Just if you get a question that you feel is difficult, take your time to answer it, which he did. But I just want you to be prepared that these circumstances come up, and you have to just take a deep breath and try and answer it the best you can. Okay, so how to prepare. This is important. Know your story is the most important thing. Read your essays over. Think about the sound bites. I suggest to my clients to read over every essay and then ask themselves what's not on this page that they might want to know about. That will help frame your thinking. It will also trigger things that you might not have thought about. Maybe you wrote your essays, 3 months ago. You have to rethink the decisions of what you put in your essays and what you didn't get in your essays, maybe because of word count, maybe because you thought of something else, whatever it might be. As I said before, know the school. Get smart on the school. Read the blogs from the admissions office. Read the other student blogs. Read the press releases. You could Google the interviewer. I wouldn't go in and tell the interviewer, every last thing about him or her, but you still could Google them just so you get a sense, and if there's any commonality that you could connect with them, that always can help. Practice. Practice, practice, practice. As we say here, use the mirror. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the lens exercise on the next slide. Just you want to know your stuff inside and out. As I said, don't be rehearsed because you're not memorizing a script. You just want to know your stuff. Also, think about the weakest part of your application. So let's say you haven't done a lot of community service or you had limited extracurricular activities in college, and you get this interview about what do you do outside of work. You can be upfront. You can say, I work 100 hours a week, I have limited time, but when I can, I do this, this, and this. Or I worked part-time in college, which limited my ability to take on a leadership role in my clubs, but I was an active member. Also, remember that you can draw on other stories. Like if you are lacking in community service, you can still draw on stories about your personal journey if you helped friends in need or things like that. That can be something that you draw on to show that personal side, that life outside of work. Just keep that in mind. Also, I just wanted to say, and I said this earlier, you probably won't get asked about your GMAT or your GPA, and don't bring it up either. If you have a low score, this isn't the time to try and talk your score up or diffuse a low GPA or a low GMAT. Don't talk about it unless you have to. So this is a good way to prep. What we usually suggest is to have a bench of 4 or 5 stories that you can pull from depending on the question. And you identify these stories, and then you look at it in all these different ways. So right here we have this applicant who spends 1 day a week tutoring inmates for their GED. So there's all these different questions that could be asked for this one experience. Like, for instance, describe an innovative solution you have created to address a specific challenge. So you could talk about one particular inmate was having trouble learning blah, blah, blah. What matters to you most and why? You could answer, drawing from this example, helping others improve their life circumstances. Now, I don't want you to think that if you got all these questions, you would use the same example. No, but you could take this example and use it once during your interview to answer these 6 different questions. One of the if asked during your interview, you would use it once for one of these questions, and that will just help you prepare if you have stories that are multifunctional. Okay, the getting stumped question. The client, I just was telling you about the client who got the kind of off-base question at HBS, and I'm glad we talked to him about take a drink of water because that always helps kind of clear your head and helps you regroup. A lot of these interviewers will offer you water. Go ahead, take it. It might come in handy. If you are not sure of an answer, you don't want to ramble and begin a story that doesn't make sense. If you're confused, ask the interviewer to repeat the question again, and that might help you focus. You don't want to shoehorn a story into a question, okay? That would be a bad idea. Take your time. It's okay to say, you know what, I have to just think about it for a second, and I guarantee you probably 95% of the time something will pop into your head that you can answer because you practiced so you're ready. Don't make up answers. As a journalist, my whole life was learning how to read people, and admissions committee interviewers and alumni interviewers, they're good at telling when people aren't really telling a good story or a true story. Don't make up an answer. You'll go down a road and you won't know what to do, and it won't be pretty. It will actually look really bad. They will be able to tell. So I strongly recommend you not doing that. So there aren't really any trick questions, but a big question that people worry about is what other schools have you applied to? And this is really worth practicing, this question, because it's not hard. You just have to be prepared for it. We recommend, first of all, don't provide a comprehensive list. We recommend a strategy called peer logic pivot approach. And in that, you provide 2 or 3 peer schools, explain how they're similar, and then you pivot to emphasize how the school where you're interviewing is the best fit for you. So for instance, someone applying to Columbia could also mention Wharton or Chicago because of the strength in finance. But then they could say, you know, but Columbia is really my first choice because at no other school do they have such an amazing value investing program, and I really, really want to be in that program. You know, that brings it back to the school that you are interviewing at. Keep that in mind. Practice this. Look for commonalities. You know, maybe somebody applying to Ross could use, you know, could compare Darden and Tuck and say, you know, I'm applying to those 3 for general management, but I really like this at Ross. It's not hard once you think about it. You don't need to give them every school you're applying to. So some frequently asked questions. What are the common mistakes? This is a big question all the time. Not answering the question, that's the answer to that one. That's a big problem. Not seeming interested if it's not your top choice school. This will be noticed, as I mentioned before. Also, the lack of time management and lack of preparation. They'll notice that if you're just rambling on and they are like, oh my God, where are we going with this? They will really notice that you're not prepared for this interview, that you did not do your homework. In terms of should I ask for feedback, you don't get any feedback, unfortunately. Most schools will not give you any precise feedback when you're in the application process. If you're rejected, they might be willing to give you a little bit of something, but I would never count on that. What should I wear? If it's on campus, I would dress business formal. I say suits for men and women. There's nothing casual about going to an on-campus interview. Off-campus, it's a little more liberal, but I always say it's better to be overdressed than underdressed. The last thing you want is to be casual and the person you're interviewing with be in a suit. So I always say wear the suit. You can always take the jacket off if the person's wearing like jeans, but it's better to look like you're taking the interview seriously. My interviews at Starbucks, who should pay? My advice to my clients is show up a few minutes early, buy yourself a cup of coffee so you have it, and then when the interviewer comes, you can either offer to buy them something. If they say no, then you don't have to, don't press it, or maybe they'll just sit down and do the interview with you. But at least you're covered and it's not that uncomfortable, like, can I get this for you? You're avoiding that. If my interview is comprehensive, do I need to come up with new stories that I haven't discussed in my essays? Well, for the most part, the answer is probably not. But it wouldn't hurt just to, think a little bit about the stories that you have and ways that they could be expanded. Because remember, they only have your essays, and that's a limited word count. There might be other details in there that matter. We often get questions of how many applicants are interviewed, or if I get an interview, what are my chances of acceptance? A lot of people will say, oh, I didn't get in, I must have blown the interview. You can't think like that. After you do the interview, there's a whole review of your entire application again, and everyone's application again. So don't put it on you that you blew it during the interview. It really doesn't work like that. And different schools interview a different number of people. For instance, Ross historically has interviewed like up to 50% of its applicants, while a school like Haas interviews like a quarter of its applicants. So every school is different. Okay, so what to do after the interview? Send the thank you note really quickly, like that day, please. And it can be email. It does not have to be a written note. In fact, I recommend to do it via email because you want it to get there before they have to submit their notes from the interview to the admissions committee. So email is fine. What's key is don't just reiterate your desire to attend the school. Bring up a specific conversation and discussion of topics you had during the interview. If you reference something you talked about, they'll remember you, and that's important. Like, I enjoyed learning more about Ross's Green Initiative, and I look forward to making an impact as a student. And by the way, the thank you note is not another essay. It shouldn't be 600 words. It should be 2 paragraphs, in and out, shows that's respectful, references something that you talked about. Thank you very much. Keep that in mind. Okay, so now we're winding down, and then I'm open to your questions. Just a few things on mbaMission. So you just know, mbaMission is an admissions consulting firm. We consider ourselves to be, here it says elite communicators, but okay, I believe that. We're all writers first and MBA second. We really all have a strong writing background, and I think that's really important as we coach people on their business school journey. We have terrific partners like Beat the GMAT who really validate our success. We have people like me who have admissions experience. Many people are very involved in the schools that they went to and really have great insight. We have a great, really rich blog that has essay analysis for all the top schools. We have a blog that's constantly updated with different kinds of tips on all sorts of things relating to the business school journey. We have our complete start to finish MBA admissions guide, which for anybody who is prepping to do interviews, there's a great interview chapter with lots of questions that you can practice with, and we also have a good chapter on waitlist strategies in case that's something that you face, so I really recommend that. We have this complete start to finish package, which basically holds your hand through the entire application journey, from brainstorming to interview prep to resume review to scholarship counseling. It's all inclusive, and it's really terrific. You work really closely with consultants like me. And here are just some of our consultants who we all come from the top business schools, and as I said, we really feel committed to business schools, and we all loved it, and we want other people to get the same experiences that we had. Now, we offer mock interview prep, and basically it's a half-hour interview and a half-hour of going over every single answer you gave to our questions, and a half-hour of prep time. So we look over all your stuff, so we just have good insight into who you are. So it's not truly a blind interview because we're prepping in advance. So anybody interested in doing a mock interview, you can email us at interview@mbaMission.com. And lastly, we also offer free consultations, and we can talk to you about really anything during the free consultations. You know, if you're stressed about interviews, we can talk about that. Anything you want, you can go to the website that's listed here and sign up for a free consult with any of our consultants, and it's a half hour, and you can direct it any way you'd like. If you haven't yet applied to business school and you're interested for next year and you're getting ahead a little, we also do a lot of profile analysis on during these free consultations. So I hope that gave you a good roadmap to the interview process. It was really a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to some of your questions.
Okay, wonderful. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for the great session. Certainly learned a lot, lots of great tactical advice. And to our audience, as well as to Rachel, appreciate your patience in sticking with us, since we did have some technical issues during the session with the audio, but glad that we got that resolved. Rachel, I know that we're over time at this point, but do you think you could stick around for maybe one or two questions?
Oh, of course.
Okay, fantastic. Lots and lots and lots of great questions coming in during the session. But let's start with this one. So this one is a question from Ryan and Ananth. So they're asking, what about Skype interviews? Do you have any tips for etiquette when it comes to Skype interviews?
Well, I think if you're going to do a Skype interview, the same ground rules apply. I think that you still have to know your stuff cold. You still should put on a jacket and a tie because you want to show respect and you want to show that this is important to you. And schools understand that some people are just too far away and can't make it, and Skype is a fine alternative. I know a lot of applicants do Skype interviews. You have to come to that interview top of your game, just like you're sitting across from the person at Starbucks. That's really, it's the same game, or you're sitting, in the admissions office at HBS. Whatever it might be, you need to prepare, and you need to look the part, and you need to act the part, even though it's over the web or the internet or however you describe Skype.
Yeah, that's right. As I like to joke sometimes with people about the Skype interviews, you can take the anchorman technique as well. Just have a nice suit and tie blazer, and then the rest below the field of the camera is up to you.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Very classy. I have a great question here coming in from VJ as well. So VJ is asking, in terms of time management, how long should your responses be? Your star response was short and crisp. Is that how long my response should be?
I typically tell my clients, do not spend more than 4 minutes answering any question. And that really should be your time limit. Because once you kind of cross that line, you're losing the focus of the interviewer. You really want them to stay focused on your conversation. And once it goes on and on and on and on, people start losing focus. So you really want to keep them, I would say, 3 to 4 minutes tops. And as you're practicing, I really recommend bringing in a stopwatch so you can time your answers, so you really know, okay, this is how long I'm talking for. And you'll start getting a sense of what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. Also, keeping them 3 or 4 minutes means you get to answer more questions, so they get to learn more about you. Just like in your applications, where you don't want to just, you want to get as many facts as possible into your essays about you. You don't want to just tell them one story. You want to tell them one story, and within that one story, there's 3 other stories. During the interview, you want them to learn as much as possible about who you are. So if you're talking for 10 minutes on one question, that means you're losing the opportunity to probably give 2 other answers.
Great. Well, Rachel, I think this is unfortunately going to be our last question that we can take, but it's a good one. I like this one. It's from Harleen. The question is about, can you sound too prepared? The question goes, for answers to common questions like why choose a specific school, I've heard from candidates that flowery or too polished of an answer doesn't sit well with student interviewers. Any truth to that?
I think you just need to be true to yourself. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all response. There are so many student interviewers, and they're all trained differently at all of the schools who do them. So I don't think that you could just say, like, you shouldn't have this polished answer. You need to give the real reason why this school is right for you. And if you are true to yourself and you give the real reason why this is a place that you want to spend the next 2 years, that will come through and it will be believable. It's when you're forcing the issue, where you're trying to hit like all the right points versus why you really want to be there. And I really think that matters, because you want to come through as being genuine. And I think that might be part of your question. When you're acting too rehearsed or too polished, you don't seem genuine. So you want to give an honest answer of why this school is really attractive to you, and that might be more than one reason. And just articulate that. And that's part of the practice and being comfortable and confident at the same time. And I think by practicing those kind of questions, you'll just be able to say it, and it won't be necessarily so polished. It will just be matter-of-factly.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Rachel, and completely agree. For those of you who joined us into this presentation, we've been speaking with Rachel Beck. Rachel is a senior consultant with mbaMission, and we've just heard her advice on how to go about preparing for interviews, which is highly relevant for us who are hopefully enjoying the upcoming round 2 interviews this season. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us. It was really great to have you today.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and for those of you in the audience whom we didn't get to your question, thank you for being with us until the end of this session. I know we had some technical issues, and if you want to try to follow up with an MBA Mission person to get some answers to your questions, we have a number of great channels to do so. One is check out the resources on mbaMission.com. Rachel mentioned that there are some opportunities for some free consultation. There are services as well for mock interviews, so check that out. And also, I'll say that on the Beat the GMAT community, if you go to our discussion forums, there is an Ask MBA Mission forum where a number of MBA Mission staffers are standing by to receive your question and provide you an excellent answer. So thank you guys so much for spending your evening with us, and we hope to see you again in a future event. Take care, everyone.